I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but what happened changed not just my career, but my entire perspective on business and success. My name is Mark Chambers, and at 48, I was at the peak of my career as head of enterprise solutions at TechFusion, one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country. I'd given the company 15 years of my life, missed birthdays, postponed anniversaries, late nights that turned into early mornings. My division was responsible for 47% of the company's total revenue, and I had personally secured our 3 largest accounts. Richard Harlow, TechFusion's CEO, was the picture of corporate success, designer suits, luxury watches, and the smug confidence of someone who'd never faced real failure. In public, he praised my work. In private, he viewed me as a necessary tool, nothing more. The quarterly numbers are exceptional, I told Richard during what would be our final meeting, pointing to the 32% growth my team had achieved for the 3rd consecutive quarter. About the compensation review we discussed last year. Something shifted in Richard's eyes, a calculation, a reassessment. Yes. The timing is challenging. The board is focused on our expansion into Asia. We had an agreement, I reminded him, thinking of my daughter's Princeton acceptance letter sitting on our kitchen counter at home. My team's performance is funding a significant portion of that expansion. Everyone's making sacrifices, Richard replied smoothly, though I'd noticed the new Porsches in the executive parking lot and the company car given to Jake Phillips, who'd been with the company only 2 years. The conversation deteriorated rapidly. It's not about the money, Richard, I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. It's about respect. About recognizing value. I've given this company everything. Richard stood abruptly. I think you need to cool down and reflect on your attitude. This kind of entitlement doesn't suit you. Entitlement? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Expecting fair compensation for exceptional work is entitlement. We determine what's fair here, Mark. Not you. Richard's voice turned to ice. And I'm beginning to question whether you're still a good cultural fit for TechFusion. I stared in disbelief. After 15 years? After everything I've built for you? For the company, Richard corrected with a slight curl of his lips. Don't confuse your role with ownership. Everyone is replaceable, Mark. Even you. Those words would echo in my mind for months to come. The fall. The termination email arrived at 7:32 a.m. the next morning, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. 15 years reduced to a corporate form letter citing conduct unbecoming of senior management, and irreconcilable differences regarding company values. When I arrived at the office, my access badge was already deactivated. 2 security guards escorted me to my office like a criminal, past colleagues who quickly averted their eyes, through the bullpen where my team sat in shocked silence. I held my head high, though each step felt like walking through quicksand. In my office, I found a cardboard box already half filled with my things. The family photos had been removed from their frames, one cracked in the process. My awards and certificates were packed haphazardly, one broken at the corner. You have 15 minutes, one guard informed me, checking his watch. As I gathered my remaining possessions, I noticed my team watching from the bullpen, their faces a mixture of shock, sympathy, and fear. Denise, my longest-serving team member, approached the office doorway but was waved back by security. At the elevator, Richard appeared as if on cue, flanked by 2 board members and Jake Phillips, who looked uncomfortably ambitious, a wolf pup learning from the alpha. Mark, Richard nodded curtly. I trust this transition is being handled professionally. I looked at the man who had just destroyed a decade and a half of my career and felt a cold clarity replace my shock. Always professional, Richard. Unlike some. Richard's eyes narrowed fractionally before he forced a thin smile. Good. I've always said you were a reasonable man. I'm sure you'll land on your feet somewhere, appropriate. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Richard's satisfied expression. That expression would become the fuel for what was to come. The sabotage. The extent of Richard's vindictiveness became clear in the following weeks as my job search hit wall after wall of rejections. After a particularly promising interview that ended with a sudden, unexplained rejection, I reached out to James Wilson, a college friend who worked at the company. "I shouldn't be telling you this," James said over beers, his voice low. "But Harlow's been making calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind that kill careers. He's telling everyone that you misappropriated company resources, that you were emotionally unstable, that you threatened him during your final confrontation." "That's slander," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. "I know that," James replied. "But Richard Harlow sits on 3 industry boards, plays golf with half the CEOs in the sector, and has venture capital friends who fund the other half. People listen to him." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Elena, my wife of 20 years, explaining the full extent of our situation. Our savings would last maybe 6 months if we were careful. The Princeton tuition deposit was due in 4 weeks. "I might have to look outside the tech sector," I said, staring at our budget spreadsheet. "Start over." Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Or you could do what you've always talked about." "What do you mean?" "Your own company," she said simply. "All those nights you came home frustrated because they wouldn't implement your ideas. You've been solving Tech Fusion's problems for 15 years. Why not solve them for people who will actually value you?" I started listing all the reasons it wouldn't work: the startup costs, the risk, the competitive landscape dominated by larger firms like Tech Fusion, Richard's influence that could poison potential clients against me. "Mark, listen to me," Elena interrupted, her eyes fierce with determination. "That man didn't just take your job. He's trying to take your future. Are you going to let him?" There was fire in her words, a conviction that sparked something dormant in my chest. For the first time since the termination email, I felt a glimmer of possibility breaking through the darkness. "It would be a risk," I said slowly. "We'd have to remortgage the house. Use our retirement savings as seed money." "So we remortgage," Elena said firmly. "Sophie's got her scholarship. We don't need a house this big. What we need is for you to be the man I know you are, the man who doesn't let bullies win." I looked at my wife and felt the weight on my shoulders shift from a burden to a challenge. "Chambers Solutions," I said, testing the name on my tongue. Elena smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Has a nice ring to it. The rebuild. Starting a business at 48, with a mortgage, a daughter entering an Ivy League college, and an industry titan actively working against you, is an act of defiance bordering on madness. We sold our suburban 4-bedroom for a modest condo closer to the city. We downsized from 2 cars to 1, cut back on everything from cable subscriptions to coffee shops. I converted our 2nd bedroom into an office, setting up with a single desk, my personal laptop, and a determination that surprised even myself. My first client came through Elena's brother, who managed a regional distribution company struggling with outdated inventory systems. I quoted half what Tech Fusion would have charged and delivered a system that actually worked for their specific needs, not a one-size-fits-all corporate solution. The big firms treat companies our size as an afterthought, my brother-in-law explained to a colleague, who became my second client. "Mark actually listens." Word spread slowly but steadily. By month 3, I was working 16-hour days to keep up with demand. By month 6, I hired my first employee, Denise, who had quit Tech Fusion after witnessing my treatment. "It's chaos over there," she told me during our first lunch meeting. "Richard replaced you with Jake Phillips, who's completely out of his depth. Your old team is being split up and reassigned. They've lost the NetSphere account, and Global Finance is threatening to review their contract." I hadn't allowed myself to feel satisfaction at Tech Fusion's troubles, but I couldn't deny a certain poetic justice in the situation. The turning point came 9 months in, when I landed a contract with Regional Health, a growing healthcare provider with 30 locations across 3 states. Their IT infrastructure was a patchwork of incompatible systems, exactly the kind of complex problem I excelled at solving. The project required more resources than Chambers Solutions currently had. I took a calculated risk, hiring 3 more staff and investing in new equipment. For 6 weeks, I barely saw my family, working through nights and weekends to ensure the project's success. When Regional Health Systems went live without a hitch, their CTO was so impressed he recommended Chambers Solutions to his entire professional network. By the end of the first year, I had a team of 7 and had moved into proper office space. That night, I received an unexpected email from a former client at TechFusion, one of the largest accounts I'd personally secured. "I've been following your new venture," the email read. "Our contract with TechFusion is up for renewal next quarter. I'd like to discuss alternatives." I stared at the message for a long moment, then began to type my reply. I didn't mention Richard or TechFusion once. I didn't need to. The work would speak for itself. The rise. 3 years passed in a blur of growth and validation. Chambers Solutions found its sweet spot in the market, complex enterprise solutions for mid-sized companies delivered with personal attention that the larger firms couldn't match. We expanded to 23 employees, most poached from larger competitors, including 5 more from TechFusion who brought with them institutional knowledge and disillusionment in equal measure. I made a point of implementing everything TechFusion had denied me: performance-based bonuses that actually reflected achievement, flexible working hours, family leave policies that acknowledged employees had lives outside work, and a company culture that valued results over appearances. Each quarter brought new clients, many defecting from TechFusion after experiencing the difference in service quality. I never directly poached accounts, I didn't need to. Richard's cost-cutting measures and focus on short-term profits over client satisfaction were doing the work for me. At an industry conference in Chicago, I had just finished delivering a keynote on client-centered development strategies, when I was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Richard Harlow's new executive assistant. "Mr. Harlow would like to speak with you," she said nervously. "Perhaps over dinner tonight?" I considered the invitation for a moment, then smiled politely. "Please tell Mr. Harlow that I'm fully booked this trip. Perhaps another time." It was a small satisfaction to decline, but I had learned the value of choosing my own timing. The truth behind Richard's sudden interest became clear a month later when industry news reported that TechFusion had lost their largest client, Global Finance, a banking conglomerate that accounted for nearly 30% of their annual revenue. The client had cited persistent issues with system implementation and support as their reason for terminating the decade-long relationship. What the news didn't report, but I learned through my network, was that Global Finance had already signed with Chambers Solutions for their next integration project. TechFusion stock dropped 22% overnight. Further investigation by financial journalists revealed that they had been hiding declining performance for several quarters through creative accounting that was now under SEC scrutiny. When my phone rang a week later and Richard Harlow's name appeared on the screen, I was prepared. This time, I accepted the invitation to meet. The confrontation. The restaurant Richard selected was excessively expensive, exclusively reserved, and populated by people more interested in being seen than enjoying their meal. Richard was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, nursing what appeared to be his second scotch. The years had not been kind to Richard Harlow. His immaculate appearance had slipped noticeably, his suit still expensive but slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes poorly concealed, and a new tightness around his mouth that spoke of constant stress. "Mark, thank you for coming. You're looking well." I accepted his handshake briefly, noting the slight dampness of his palm. "Thank you for the invitation. Though I admit I'm curious about its purpose." Richard immediately ordered another scotch without asking if I wanted anything. "I'll have sparkling water," I told the waiter, maintaining eye contact with Richard. The small power move wasn't lost on either of us, me declining alcohol to keep my mind sharp while Richard dulled his edges with expensive scotch. "I've been following your success with Chambers Solutions," Richard said. "Very impressive growth trajectory." "We found our niche," I replied neutrally. "Indeed you have." Richard took a large swallow of his remaining scotch. "Particularly among clients who might find larger firms," challenging to work with. I allowed myself a small smile. We prefer to say we offer right-sized solutions with personalized attention. The waiter returned with our drinks, and Richard immediately took a sip of his fresh scotch. I noted the slight tremor in his hand. "I'll be direct, Mark," Richard said. "Tech Fusion is in a transitional period. The loss of global finance was significant. The board is concerned about stability and client retention." "I imagine they would be," I replied evenly. "Global finance was with you for what, 12 years? 14, Richard corrected with a flash of irritation. "The point is, we're exploring strategic partnerships to strengthen our market position." "Partnerships?" "Consulting arrangements, initially," Richard clarified. "With the possibility of more formal structures in the future." Now I understood perfectly. Richard wanted to leverage Chamber Solutions' reputation to stabilize Tech Fusion without actually acknowledging his past mistakes. He wanted to use me as a life raft while pretending it was a strategic alliance. "You're essentially asking me to consult for Tech Fusion," I stated flatly. Richard winced slightly at the directness. "In a manner of speaking. We would compensate you quite generously, of course. And it would be strictly confidential." I studied the man who had once threatened to destroy my career, who had actively worked to prevent me from finding another job, who had mocked the idea that I could ever succeed on my own. Richard looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own failures and the weight of a company in decline. "So you want me to secretly help the company that fired me and then blacklisted me throughout the industry," I said calmly. "You want me to provide solutions for the problems you created when you decided I was disposable." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "The past is the past, Mark. This is business." "It is indeed," I agreed, taking a sip of my water. "And in business, timing and leverage are everything. A lesson I learned the hard way." "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Tech Fusion stock has dropped 47% in the past quarter. I'm saying that 3 more of your enterprise clients are currently in talks with Chamber Solutions. I'm saying that your company is currently valued at less than half what it was when you fired me." I set my glass down carefully. "And I'm saying that you're not offering a partnership. You're asking for a lifeline." Richard's face flushed with anger that quickly gave way to something closer to desperation. "Don't overestimate your position, Mark. Tech Fusion is still one of the largest firms in the sector." "Size isn't everything," I replied calmly. "Ask Global Finance." For a moment, Richard seemed ready to erupt, but then his shoulders sagged slightly as the reality of his situation reasserted itself. "What do you want, then? Money? A public apology?" I shook my head. "Neither." "Then what?" "I want Tech Fusion." Richard stared at me, momentarily speechless. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious," I said, my voice level. "Here's my offer. Chamber Solutions will provide comprehensive consulting services to stabilize your client relationships and fix your systems issues. In exchange, I want 60% controlling interest in Tech Fusion." "That's absurd," Richard sputtered. "The board would never agree." "Present them with the alternatives," I suggested. "Continued decline, potential bankruptcy, or a new direction under leadership that your clients actually trust. I think you'll find them quite receptive, especially with the SEC investigation looming." Richard's knuckles whitened around his glass. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" For the first time, I allowed my carefully maintained professionalism to slip, just slightly. "Do you remember what you said to me the day before you fired me? Everyone is replaceable, Mark. Even you. I've spent 3 years proving you wrong. Now it's your turn to learn the lesson." The takeover. The negotiations took 6 weeks. Richard fought against the inevitable, proposing countless alternatives and attempting to leverage his remaining connections to force more favorable terms. But the Tech Fusion board, facing plummeting stock prices, a mass exodus of clients, and the specter of an expanding SEC investigation, eventually overruled him. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I sat in the Tech Fusion boardroom, the same room where I had once presented quarterly reports as an employee, and signed the final documents transferring controlling interest of the company to Chambers Solutions. Richard was conspicuously absent from the proceedings. "Mr. Harlow sends his apologies," the board chairman explained awkwardly. He had an unavoidable conflict. After the signing, I addressed the combined staff in the Tech Fusion atrium. I spoke about vision, about client-focused solutions, and about creating a culture of respect and recognition. I didn't mention Richard or the past. "We're moving forward," I told them. "The only direction that matters." As the crowd dispersed, I noticed Jake Phillips, the man who had replaced me 3 years ago, looking decidedly nervous at the edge of the atrium. I approached him with a neutral expression. "Jake, do you have a moment?" We walked to a quiet corner, away from curious ears. "You're worried about your position," I stated matter-of-factly. Jake nodded, unable to maintain eye contact. "I understand if you want your own people in leadership roles." I studied him for a moment. "What do you think is your greatest weakness as a leader, Jake?" The question clearly caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally answered with unexpected honesty, "I sometimes trust the wrong people's judgment. I should have questioned more of the decisions that were made." I nodded thoughtfully. "We all make mistakes, Jake. The question is whether we learn from them." I extended my hand. "I expect all executives to put clients first and to treat every employee with respect. If you can commit to that, there's a place for you in the new structure." The relief on Jake's face was palpable as he shook my hand. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As Jake hurried away, Denise appeared at my side. "That was generous of you," she observed. I shrugged. "It's not about revenge. It's about building something better." Speaking of revenge, Denise said, "Richard's office has been cleared out. Apparently, he came in at 5 a.m. to avoid seeing anyone." I checked my watch. "He's probably at the airport by now." His resignation included a non-compete clause. "He won't be in tech for a while." "Does that bother you?" Denise asked. "Not getting to face him one last time?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. This was never about Richard. It was about proving what's possible when you refuse to be defined by someone else's valuation of your worth. I looked around the atrium, at the employees of both companies cautiously mingling, at the potential taking shape before my eyes. Besides, I added with a small smile, I did leave something for him. The last word. Richard Harlow sat in the first-class lounge at O'Hare International Airport, nursing a scotch and ignoring the concerned glances from his wife sitting across from him. Their flight to Phoenix wouldn't board for another hour, but he'd insisted on arriving early, desperate to put as much distance as possible between himself and the humiliation he'd left behind. His phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost ignored it. He'd received dozens of regretful messages from colleagues and industry contacts who'd suddenly found themselves too busy for lunch now that he was no longer CEO of Tech Fusion. But the sender's name caught his attention, Mark Chambers. Against his better judgment, Richard opened the email. "Richard. By now you're probably well on your way to whatever next chapter you've arranged for yourself. I imagine you're seeing today as a defeat, the loss of something you built. I understand that perspective better than most. When you fired me 3 years ago, you said something I've never forgotten: everyone is replaceable. At the time, I took it as a cruel dismissal of 15 years of dedication. Now, I see it differently. We are all replaceable in our roles. No company, no position defines us. What defines us are the choices we make when faced with adversity, and how we treat people on our way up and down the ladder. I've cleared out your personal belongings and had them shipped to your Phoenix address. You'll also find an unexpected item, the keys to a new Audi A6. It's the company car you never approved for me. Consider it a reminder that sometimes, the things we withhold from others have a way of circling back to us. The car isn't a gift. It's a challenge. Use this setback as I used mine, to build something better than you had before. Not out of spite, but because adversity reveals what we're truly capable of. You'll find the car in the executive parking space that once had your name on it. The space now reads, reserved for the future. That future can still be yours, just not here. Mark Chambers, CEO, TechFusion Global. Richard stared at the screen, a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. Anger. Shame. And somewhere, buried beneath years of corporate armor, a grudging respect. He deleted the email without responding and drained the last of his scotch. Our flight's boarding soon, his wife said, watching him carefully. Are you all right? Richard looked up, suddenly seeing the concern in her eyes, concern he'd been too preoccupied to notice for months. No, he admitted, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. But I think I might be, eventually. The legacy. 5 years later, at the annual Tech Innovation Awards in San Francisco, Mark Chambers took the stage to accept the Lifetime Achievement Award. At 56, he had transformed the merged TechFusion Chambers entity into an industry leader known as much for its workplace culture as its technological innovations. His acceptance speech was brief but powerful. He spoke about failure as a teacher, about the importance of valuing people over profits, about building businesses that enhanced lives rather than consuming them. Success isn't measured by what you accumulate, he told the audience of industry leaders. It's measured by what you create, the opportunities you provide, the lives you improve, the positive change you generate. In the front row, Elena smiled up at him with pride. Beside her sat their daughter Sophie, now a software engineer at her father's company, developing programs that made enterprise technology accessible to small businesses and nonprofits. As Mark mingled with guests at the reception afterward, a young entrepreneur approached him nervously. Mr. Chambers, the young man said, I just wanted to thank you. Your story, it kept me going when I was ready to give up on my startup after being turned down by every venture capital firm in the valley. Mark smiled. And how's your company doing now? The young man's face lit up. We just secured our Series B funding. We're expanding into 3 new markets next quarter. That's the real victory, Mark said, shaking his hand. Not just surviving, but creating something valuable in spite of those who said you couldn't. Later that evening, as Mark and Elena drove home, she took his hand across the console of their car, the same modest vehicle they'd kept even after their finances had recovered. You know what I was thinking about during your speech? She asked. What's that? That day at the kitchen table, when you were ready to give up. When you thought Richard had won. Mark nodded, remembering that dark moment when it had seemed his entire career had been erased. I'm so proud of you, Elena continued. Not because you beat Richard. Not because you took his company. But because you never became him. You built something better, not just a better company, but a better way of doing business. Mark squeezed her hand, thinking of the email he'd sent Richard 5 years ago. He'd never received a reply, but he'd heard through industry channels that Richard had started a small consulting firm in Phoenix, helping troubled companies restructure. The ultimate revenge wasn't in defeating Richard Harlow. It was in transcending the game he'd been playing all along, the game of power and control, of seeing people as expendable resources. Mark had built something fundamentally different, a company where success was measured not just in profit, but in purpose. That night, as Mark stood at their bedroom window looking out at the city lights, he felt not the satisfaction of revenge but the peace of vindication. He had proven not that Richard was wrong about him, but that Richard was wrong about everything, about business, about leadership, about what truly mattered. And in the end, that was the sweetest victory of all. If you enjoyed this true revenge story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.